What's up, everybody? What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Left-Handed Leftist podcast. You all, I am so excited for this. First of all, before we start off, Happy New Year's, everybody. Happy holiday season. So glad to have you back. This year, we are going full force into 2026. We're going to be covering more about Maryland. We're going to be covering more politics. We're going to be covering more candidates this year, especially as we are heading into an election cycle. And you all, let's go ahead and kick it off with our first guest for today's podcast. We are joined by Owen Silverman Andrews. He is the Lieutenant Governor candidate for the Green Party of Maryland. And you all, I cannot wait for this wonderful conversation. We're going to be talking about his candidacy, his activism. We're going to be talking about data centers, reparations, the veto, the Maryland General Assembly, and so much more. So without further ado, you all, let's get into it. Awesome. What's up, you all? Owen Silverman Andrews, thank you for being here with Left-Handed Leftist. How you doing? How's your almost holiday season kicking off?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Carlos. This is a great opportunity and love the name of the podcast. So as a fellow left-handed leftist, when I saw you start doing your thing, I was like, okay, I got to listen in and maybe I'll get a chance to come on. So this is a real treat for me.
Definitely. I'm so glad to have you. And yes, I used to always ask people, or actually I never started, but they would just like tell me if they're left-handed or not. But it's not a lot of us out here, so we got to stick together some kind of way.
Definitely. And, on a deeper level, I actually think being left-handed in a world that's designed for right-handed people does give you some perspective on systems and how they operate all around us in ways that folks often aren't paying attention to if the system is designed for them. And that works for racial privilege and gender privilege and on the many intersections of diversity. But we don't often talk about left-handedness, and there's this historical oppression, right? Like we used to be burned at the stake for being left-handed. So obviously those are not the conditions we're operating under today. But I do think actually there's a connection between thinking differently and being left-handed dominant.
Okay, so I might have to do it like we're gonna have to spin back around for a separate podcast just with like left-handed people to talk about how we've been like marginalized. Because when I tell you, growing up just using scissors was so difficult, and people look at you
Right.
crazy.
And
Like
the
my whole
teacher would be like,
family's
why?
right-handed.
Yeah, the teacher would be like, why can't you cut right? And it's like, this is my hand that I use to cut, and you don't have the scissors that are designed for me. I mean, it really is kind of like that classic meme of what equity versus equality means, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, give us the left-handed scissor and we'll cut just as well as anybody else.
Right. Probably better. Like
Yeah,
probably better because we are more creative people. So look,
right.
like let us look. So yes, with that, I want to go just like full-fledged dive right into it. If you can tell our audience like who you are, why you're running for lieutenant governor, but also why the Green Party.
Definitely. Well, I think you hit it on the head with the intro. I'm first and foremost a community organizer. I've been involved with direct action, mass mobilization, advocacy since about 2009. And I really got my start in the DMV area as an undergrad in College Park and then living in DC. And I've been organizing and making good trouble ever since. You ask about kind of the Green Party. And so I think the story kind of starts around 2009. I was a young idealistic student. I was studying Latin American foreign policy and history, which is something that I appreciate about your show, is that you really go into the foreign policy piece and you're not just focused on the hyperlocal, as important as that is. And so I was like all excited about Barack Obama. And then the first thing they do when he and Hillary Clinton get in there is the coup in Honduras. And so that was actually my first time really getting involved with street protest, with the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador out in front of the Honduran embassy and the Organization of American States down in DC. And so that kind of put a little bit of a damper on how much positive change I thought could be made with the two-party system. Obviously, there are some positive things that came out of that administration. Don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, but was I idealistic after that? No, I felt like social movements would be the way to make positive change. But I did stay registered as a Democrat just as a default, even though I had voted third party or Democrat, as the case may be, during those years. And it wasn't actually until the 2016 election when Bernie Sanders kind of had that election stolen from him, or rather the Democratic Party elite showed us who they are, which wasn't too much of a surprise. Then I was like, oh no, I got to change my registration to align better with my values. And that's when I became a Green in 2016 and got involved with the local party here in Baltimore after that.
Wow. Okay, so that's a cool trajectory, and I kind of like how you put it because it gives us different off ramps to it too. And actually, you know what? Let's just like go full fledged into it. You talked about advocating for the Honduran people and really focusing on foreign policy. I want to just get your thoughts on what I call and most people on the left call a genocide going on in Gaza. But what are
Mhm.
your thoughts around Israeli Gaza policy, and then also with the anti BDS kind of executive order that we have here in Maryland as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, the roots of my critical thinking around some of these issues did begin at University of Maryland, go Terps, right? So I took a class that was taught by an Israeli Jewish professor and a Palestinian professor. This was probably 2007, 2008. Probably wouldn't be possible today,
No.
right? And we organized a debate, and I took the Palestinian side of the debate. And so, growing up Jewish, I've been taught a very one-sided story. It turned out to have a lot of inaccuracies. Parents, kind of family, kind of liberal Zionists, and some folks in my community growing up in New York, not even liberal, just Zionist. And so that was kind of the start. Learning about the history of the Middle East, learning about the history of Palestine was sort of what started to shift my trajectory on that a little bit. And I think it was probably the bombardment of Gaza in 2014 was the first time when I was really out in the streets. Out at again, I was living in DC at the time, so out at a protest outside the Israeli embassy, and that's when I moved to Baltimore that year, and got started with a group called Baltimore Palestine Solidarity. And there had been an existing network of local organizers beforehand, but we were kind of that fresh breath of fresh air in 2014 that started taking locally rooted Palestinian solidarity organizing to the next level here in the Baltimore area. And we engaged in a lot of different tactics, including disrupting events that were, hosted by pro-Israel organizations, street protests, pressuring then Senator Ben Cardin. But also, you mentioned the BDS angle. As far as I know, we led one of the only successful boycott campaigns, certainly of the last 10 or 12 years, against SodaStream, which was then operating as an Israeli corporation operating in the West Bank. And so we organized diverse tactics, culminating in a Black Friday protest where we went from, Kmart was still a thing back then. So we went from Kmart to Staples to locally owned businesses that were selling it. And we were flyering outside of them on their busiest day of the year and getting their customers to go in and ask management and ask owners, hey, why are you selling? Why are you profiting off of this product, which is, uh, displacing Palestinians from their land. And we were successful. We got a few companies to stop, a few stores to stop carrying it. Yeah. And then it was right after that that Democrats in the House of Delegates and State Senate introduced anti BDS legislation to make it illegal for companies who even passively supported the Palestinian people through their call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions from getting bids and contracts with the state. And we, through a statewide coalition, we beat that legislation in the General Assembly 3 years in a row. And it was only after that that Governor Hogan signed an executive order to that effect. And then Governor Moore has pledged to keep it in place as long as he's in power. So you again sometimes more clearly through foreign policy than in other domestic features of our politics, you see the duopoly in effect, very similar policy when it comes to Israel Palestine.
Wow. Okay. So there's so much with that. One, I did not know that SodaStream because I read a bio about you on the Green Party website, and I read about the SodaStream part. I did not know that it was that's an Israeli company, and it's like, wow. Like, okay, I do also love when like foreign policy mixes with like anti-capitalism, anti like corporation rhetoric too. So like that just perked my ears up. And then one for you to also, I'll say this, it is unusual and it's actually a good thing that you do not normally see politicians or people who run for office come from like an activism background. Normally they're a lawyer, they're a lobbyist, they are a doctor or some other high up field that has like no relation to actual people. And it's so just like refreshing that you're coming from this from a activist background. And then also to learn, I did not know at first because I always thought the anti BDS order was just like a Hogan thing he did. And then Westmore kind of keeping it. I didn't know that this started out as like a Democrat majority type of like, hey, let's go ahead and pass this. But like, kudos to you for and the people for stopping it for all those
Yeah.
times.
Yeah, I believe it was Bobby Zirkin who,
God,
was exactly, right, so you see some of the connections between kind of anti-Black, criminal justice policy or mass incarceration policies and anti-Palestinian policy silencing anti-democratic policy, small d, right? So, yeah, it started on they couldn't pass it, right? We were successfully activated people from the ACLU of Maryland to peace and justice activists all across the state and said, hey, this is not something we should be doing. We shouldn't be restricting the free speech of Marylanders and small business owners. And so we contested it both in the General Assembly, and we also had a lawsuit against them as well, and really pulled out all the stops and put a lot of pressure on legislators, and they just couldn't form a majority. I think to your earlier point about wouldn't it be nice if we had more folks kind of from an activist background running for office? I think in a healthier multi party democratic system, we would have more of that because currently, if you're always trying to get to 51%, then anyone you've pissed off through your activism and organizing is probably going to be against you, right? But if you're trying to get to 30% or 40% because it's a multi-party system and you have ranked choice voting and that sort of thing, then you might actually see more people who have stood by their values and challenged power and have a few people who don't want to see them elected. You might see more of us running for office. So I think there's both an individual component to it in terms of my personal path to running for office, but I also think there's a systemic component to it where if we changed the way our elections operate to incentivize a more democratic, more representative system and a less zero sum scorched earth politics that we have right now with the two party doom cycle, where it's 1 inch lost by one party is an inch gained by the other, then we actually might have a more robust and more activist friendly electoral system.
no, you're right. And then one thing I'll even add to that is that in Maryland, it really doesn't even feel like we have two parties. It feels like we mostly have one, just because how much the Republicans are just like don't even have the population of Republicans here to compete. And it gets sad because one thing me and some friends were actually talking about before is that how you have like it seems like the General Assembly was more progressive, or I guess quote unquote progressive, when you had Larry Hogan as governor. So you had an actual Republican, a boogeyman for them to feel like, hey, we have to go all out to just show the differences. But now that you have a Democrat like Wes Moore in, it seems like the General Assembly is more lax to be like, you know what, let's not fight these battles. We can just be more conservative, more pro a corporate. And before we go down that road into the special session, because it also kind of shows how Westmore is very a conservative compared to normal Democrats within the state. I want to ask you one last thing about foreign policy: is what are your views on the Maryland Israel Development Center?
Yeah, so that's in our platform. If you go to gogreen2026.com, my running mate for governor, Andy Ellis, and I, we actually have a 10-point platform. And one of the 10 points, because we're living through a moment of genocide and crisis, is abolishing the MIDC. I mean, there's no reason for the state of Maryland to be favoring a foreign government and the businesses of that country over others. And any tax dollar spent incentivizing an apartheid economy is a dollar wasted that should be going to build the solidarity economy, which is another part of our platform at gogreen2026.com. So yeah, we have a whole platform plank with a decent amount of detail there that you can check out, and that abolishing the Maryland Israel Development Corporation is one of our platform planks.
Awesome. And then also, can you kind of talk about how right now within the budget deficit that we're in within the state of Maryland, how that money going to an apartheid genocidal state could be brought here to actually help the residents of Maryland?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's true at the federal level, the massive arms shipments, to Israel. The way it works is Israel kind of gets a shopping cart, right? Some people say it's not in the U.S. interests at all, and my tweak on that is, well, actually, it's in the interest of U.S. military contractors, right? Like there are provisions in that aid that makes the Israeli military and Israeli government buy U.S. made weapons to kill Palestinians with, right? So there are people getting plenty rich in the US off this policy, but it's not working class folks and it's not people in communities. And so shifting that at the federal level would have the biggest impact. But of course, we know that state legislatures and governors, they love to run for higher office, they love to run for Congress, and this is kind of their way of showing fealty. APAC and other pro-Zionist lobbies out there, by implementing kind of mini versions of it at the local level. And so, that I think would be something that on day one of the Ellis Andrews administration, we would revoke the anti BDS order and we would shut down the MIDC.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. This is definitely see, and this is why I also like talking to people from different parties because this is not anything you're going to hear coming out of like the Westmore Aruna Miller camp, or the just establishment of the Democratic Party. Probably even the quote unquote progressive people of the Democratic Party don't even talk about this.
Yeah, it's not a majoritarian position, especially not with their donors, right? It is sort of a left position, although increasingly there have been some strange things with kind of right wing critiques of Israel that we're increasingly seeing in podcast world, and so it is broadening. But if we're looking for the place where that critique meets local organizing, meets direct action, it's happening on the left, and even progressive Democrats in the General Assembly typically won't be vocal against it, even if they personally oppose it.
Yeah, you're right. It's sad that it seems like for from my perspective at least on the I hate to say the left because we're not all on the left in the same view, but on the like the Democratic left side, it seems like they are totally almost incapable of calling out the establishment or the centrist or corporate side of their party. Where on the Republicans, you see more of a openness to openly criticize establishment and the people who are running the party there. So hopefully it changes within the Democratic Party. I'm not convinced. I mean, that's why I have you on here too, because I definitely do not see a lane for us to take over the Democratic Party as people try
Yeah.
to talk about.
And again, to give them a little bit of grace, we could say, let's change the way we fund elections, right? So Andy Ellis and I are running, we're trying to qualify for Maryland's public financing program, right? And if more folks were, rejecting $6,000 checks and focusing on small dollar donations from working class Marylanders, then I think we'd have better policies that reflect those positions. But because all these politicians have to chase the big dollar, we see whether it's, subsidies for arms dealers like Lockheed Martin or support for the government of Israel, we see a real nexus between corporate interests, special elite interests, and bad policy that probably isn't supported by a majority of people.
Can you tell us about you all's plan for public financing?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question, Carlos. It is a struggle. It's an uphill struggle for sure, but it's a really energizing one. And it is based on community organizing principles of having one-to-one meetings, seeking out alternate media platforms like this, small meetings like I had at a Burger King in LaVale in Allegheny County or on the Eastern Shore. So in order to qualify for Maryland's public financing program for statewide governor candidates, there need to be 1,500 individual donors, could be a dollar, but can't be more than $250. So again, this is within a 2-year cycle. That's something that is accessible to working class people, right? Some people are doing $5 a month. Some people are doing $50 a month, but no one can give more than $250. That's the first part. 1,500 real people, not PACs, not dark money, right? But real people giving money out of their paycheck and showing that they care about this campaign and they want it to succeed. And then the other metric that the State Board of Elections requires is at least $120,000. So it can't be everyone giving a dollar. We need some folks to give a little bit more, but it is in every sense of the word, it is a progressive program in that up to the first $50 is matched times 8. So if you give $1, the state board of elections throws in $7 and it becomes $8. If you give $50, again, times eight, right? And then at the higher levels, it's matched by a smaller and smaller ratio up until 250. So it is a really good system. It's an underused system because a lot of folks, both Democrats and Republicans, still see the path to victory, putting millions of dollars in the bank, which requires them to take $6,000 checks. The one last thing I'll add is 6,000 is the maximum for state candidates in Maryland, but there's a kind of a loophole when it comes to the governor, lieutenant governor ticket, in that the governor candidate can take 6,000, the lieutenant governor candidate can take 6,000, and then their slate can take 6,000. So it's actually $18,000 that if Andy and I believed in running the traditional way, we could take $18,000 from a single donor, and now we're limited to 250. So it really is, running this campaign based on our values, based on the Green Party values of grassroots democracy, and saying, big money shouldn't run our politics. So that's how it works, and we have until late July in order to qualify. So if you want to chip in, it's gogreen2026.com/donate. Again, $1, $5 makes a big difference.
Wow. Yes, definitely. And that's insane about that loophole. I never knew that. That essentially is like, yeah, yeah, sure. $6,000 for sure. But you can give 18,000 and we'll all be hush hush about it. And then do you see any are you all worried about what happened to Jill Stein when she ran for president, where she actually was supposed to get or not her, but the campaign was supposed to get a certain amount from their public financing system that they were able to get, but the Biden administration slow walked that. Are you all going to have to deal with that same kind of thing with Wes Moore in the state?
So my answer is hopefully not, but we wouldn't be surprised, right? It's all kind of great, and we all love democracy until the comptroller has to write a $700,000 check to a couple of Green Party candidates who are calling for massive changes in state government policy, right? So that change would have to be made during this upcoming legislative session. And there are a lot more pressing issues for our delegates and state senators to take up. And certainly, if they tried to sneak something through, we would call attention to it. We would oppose it. But a real change would have to go through the legislature. But there's also all kinds of technicalities, ways of trying to disqualify folks, or slow walking, like you said at the presidential level. And so we'll be looking for both legislative interference with our progress and also that kind of bureaucratic interference with that progress. And we respect the folks at State Board of Elections. My running mate Andy actually has a good relationship and has worked with them on a number of things. And so when we went into file, they were happy to see him and knew him by name and all that stuff. So
Wow.
we trust them. They are public servants in the truest sense of the word, and politics is always at play. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. And, the better we do, I think the more of a chance there is that some games start to be played. But if we're looking at this campaign as a form of political education, what better form of political education? Going back again to my second moment of disillusionment as a young activist in 2016 with the super delegates and all of that, it's like learning how the system is designed to get the outcomes that it gets and how it will morph when it's challenged. That is a really good lesson for all of us to keep in mind, for all of us to learn, so that we're planning for any eventuality and we're building power strong enough to contest those kinds of games head on.
No, you're right. This is definitely a good education for all of us. That's why I always say, whether you like Jill Stein or not, it's definitely something to learn from her running for office. Whether you like Bernie Sanders or not, it was definitely something to learn from him running for office, and even seeing the DNC lawsuit that they can run their primary how they want to, because they're a corporation. So I think it's definitely a lot that people can learn, whether someone wins something, loses something, draw, however it breaks down. But since you mentioned that it would take a basically an active, what do you call it, not Congress, but active state house to change this, I want to get your thoughts on the most recent changes in the General Assembly. You have Speaker Adrian Jones wind up stepping down as Speaker. A number of people have actually resigned post that, but also the new Speaker has been installed, is Delegate Jocelyn Milnick. I want to get your thoughts just on her first with this change, because she potentially could be the speaker with you as lieutenant governor.
Sure. Well, I think in the mainstream and local press, you're seeing a lot of the same kind of stories told about the new speaker. And what you get from podcasts like this is kind of the personal anecdotes and the juice. I think you work for Delegate David Moon?
Yes.
So he had that blog back when like blogs were kind of new called Maryland Juice, right? So shout out to Maryland Juice. We could get a little bit juicy here. Nothing particularly negative at all. But last year I was a convener of a coalition that put forward a bill called the Credit for All Language Learning Act. And we worked pretty closely with members of the Legislative Latino Caucus, but it wasn't like, here's a good idea that would give college students who are learning English as an additional language college credit, just like if you take a Spanish class or I take a French class, we get college credit. Well, the status quo before 2024 was if your first language is Spanish or Arabic and you're studying English at a community college, you got no credit for it. And so we had this
Really?
really good idea. It didn't cost the state anything, but that doesn't mean it was easy to get through. So it must have been the fall of 2023, the Legislative Latino Caucus, under the leadership of then co-chair of the caucus, Peña Melnick, was holding a town hall in Frederick. And one of the folks who was kind of helping us get our bill into position from the inside said, you should go to this. You should go to this town hall and you should raise this issue. And so I was working with my colleague Lama, who was then working at Frederick Community College. I said, okay, this is your home turf. Is it okay if I come out here from Baltimore? And she's like, yeah, definitely. So we're sitting there and we're kind of nervous because there's like people from the community college president's office, county council members, right? Basically her boss was watching her as she was doing this after hours advocacy, which is always kind of scary. And so she gets up, she makes the case for our bill perfectly. And the answer from the front of the room was kind of, well, we already addressed that through the blueprint, which I think is kind of a problem that even folks who worked on the blueprint don't always know what all is in like they know, but they
Like the
sometimes
top level.
right. Like we talk about AI hallucinating, but I think humans hallucinate too. And it's like, oh yeah, that good thing should have been in the blueprint, but it wasn't. And so this shows the power of numbers, right? Even two. So I was right behind her. And so I got up, I grabbed the mic and I restated it. And I just pointed out respectfully, hey, this actually wasn't in the blueprint because it deals with higher education. And then Delegate Peña Melnick said, okay, I see some of my colleagues from the House of Delegates here. Which one of you is going to sponsor this bill? And she really put them on the spot. And I think, again, I'm agreeing she's a Democrat, but I thought that showed leadership that, there was a minor error, right? She thought something was in the blueprint when it wasn't. And then instead of getting defensive or instead of shutting things down or just kind of doing what a typical politician would do, okay, on to the next one. We'll deal with that later. Give me your email and I'll follow up with you. I'll have my staff follow up with you. She challenged her colleagues to sponsor it. And actually one colleague raised his hand, Delegate Joe Vogel, and said, I'll do it. And we ended up working with Delegate Jared Solomon on this because he had experience in the community college space. But it was an interesting interplay that showed some of the features of why she is so successful and why she has gotten to the highest level of Maryland politics, because she was able to adapt on her feet. She was able to kind of get a vibes check from these two people to see if we were there to, trip her up or cause trouble or just complain, or if we actually had, a realistic and positive policy to put forward. And so I think that's my Peña Melnick story. And so congratulations to her. And I think, we could see some positive change under her, especially as it relates to what I do for my day job, which is immigrant education.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. Oh, yeah, we got to talk about that too. But yeah, no, it's definitely even my own personal experience with opinion Melnick has been good just as a person. But I was actually a little surprised to see her win the speakership, just because knowing how elected officials and politicians are. And I was surprised that it was a coalition of like kind of everyone across the Democratic circles. Even some of the Republicans were like, hey, she's a good person. She's fine. Which again, one, I felt great. She knows how to create a coalition, knows how to move forward. gave me a little bit of hesitancy, as like always, is like, hold up. So even the most conservative ones and the most progressive ones, they all agree. So who's being lied to here? But I'm hoping that it turns into basically a not a free for all, but basically everyone from the different factions of the house get their own viewpoint and say. So
Mhm.
then hopefully they start moving to the left just because of her own personal ideology. But I also want to talk with you about the three like main topics that were kind of discussed during the special session. The first one being reparations. I'll say, as myself a personal supporter of the reparations bill, I was glad to see it, the veto for it, overridden. I want to get your thoughts as far as you all's platform for reparations, but also why do you think that Wes Moore was so quick to veto that legislation as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I watched a little bit of one of your previous episodes where you're talking about this with, I think, Barry, right? And so, again, this is in our platform at gogreen2026.com/priorities, pay reparations and invest in community led repair and reinvestment, right? And we've actually, we're building out each of the 10 platform planks kind of month by month. But that's one of the ones that's fully built out. And so if you want to check out our position in depth on reparations, it's right there. And we've really taken the lead from Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, which is one of the organizations that was on the forefront of pushing the reparations bill and pushing the veto override. And so I think our position is pretty clear that harm has been done, a debt is owed to the descendants of enslaved and Jim Crow folks in Maryland, that it was not just a federal policy, but it was very much a state and local policy, and that justice means paying that debt, that the state needs to pay that debt.
No, you're
And we've
right.
seen,
No, no, go ahead, please.
well, just to say, we've seen other examples of reparations. For example, after the Holocaust, Jewish folks got reparations. Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II got an apology and reparations. So this is not something completely outside of politics or history. And yet, somehow, when it comes to paying back Black folks what they're owed, it becomes this like hot button third rail of politics, and folks start getting into their feelings. And so I think that that's really important to note. There's another part of your question, but it seems like you wanted to add something.
Oh yeah, no, definitely just about we're talking about the reparations aspect. I mean, even when you look at Annapolis, where all the different government buildings are located, they used to that same area used to be called the old Fourth Ward, where actually you had a lot of black families, middle class families who lived there, owned their homes, and that were they actually were taken out of their homes by the government to say, hey, we're gonna put you all into public housing, and then we're going to turn all these homes and your generational wealth into government buildings and public garages, and they still don't have their version of reparations. And it was nice that Stuart Pittman, the county executive for their county, came out and did an apology. But to be honest, an apology doesn't mean anything without actual action behind it. So that's one reason that a lot of people fight for reparations, because it's nice to just say I'm sorry, but if I still do not have the wealth that I would have had, or I am suffering food insecurities and things like that, what does your sorry do for me? My second part of the question was related to Wes Moore. What are you all's thoughts on, or your thoughts on why he vetoed that legislation, and kind of what that says to you about his leadership in vetoing it?
Yeah. I think there's two parts of this. I think one part of it is why it's been widely discussed, and he's repeatedly denied that he has interest in higher office. But this sort of move speaks to keeping the pathway towards a presidential run open in a kind of strange way, right? Because one of the other Democratic frontrunners, Gavin Newsom, they had a study of reparations in California, and just having the study wouldn't have closed that path. So it was kind of a nod to certain more moderate figures, I think, who are encouraging him to run for president. I think that was part of it. And I also think that there was some, I think it became personal, and that's the where the formation of the slate comes into play. So I think there was some interpersonal competitive dynamics between the executive and the legislature on this. But ultimately, there's the traditional kind of means tested, low and slow, and rising tide lifts all boats way of Democrats have done social policy for a long time. And then and that's kind of what Moore is saying when he's saying he's already addressing this, is through these kind of broad based and not very specific policies. And so then there's a more reparative and specific way of addressing historical injustices, and that's where some of the members of the legislature and a lot of folks in the grassroots are. So I think there's tension between those positions, and what we're seeing is that tension play out.
Yes, yes. And one other thing too that I do want to hit on here with this before we move on is that the one issue I also have with kind of Westmore using it as like, well, let's just fix the problems with like minority communities rather than focusing on the descendants of slavery is as we see a lot of these like EI programs mostly benefit white women than any other race. And black people, we're actually benefiting less than they are. So Moore can say all this thing about housing and all that. It still is not getting to the actual root cause and the people who would actually is supposed to be helping.
Right. Affirmative action, right? That's the big outcome of affirmative action over the past few decades has been that white women have benefited the most. And right. So that's where you need to really get specific about what were the historical injustices, what wealth was extracted from which community. And that's unfortunately going to be harder for the commission to do now because they just lost 6 months of time. They didn't get an extension on the work that's they need to produce. It was supposed to be 18 months, I believe, and
Yeah.
now they only have 12 months to do the same amount of work. And so that's really on that's, it's not just politics, it's 6 months of study and policy recommendations that we've lost because of this politics. And that the end result, if it is less good than it could have been, that's a loss for all of us, and that's a real shame.
Definitely. And the real fight is going to be when it comes to they actually put together their like proposal and then we get to really see what legislators are actually down for the actual people and the ones who are like, okay, well, this is nice to study it. I don't really want to pass anything. It's just nice.
Right. This is the pregame. This is
Yeah,
the
right.
pregame. And when it comes to game time, we know that that money can only come from taxing the rich and corporations, right? They're going to claim austerity. They're going to claim the state doesn't have that money. Of course, Maryland has more millionaires per capita than any other state. And some of that money has been passed down or mixed around and is directly related to enslavement and other historic injustices. And so there is a solution, but yeah, that's what we got to keep our eye on the ball when it comes to game time, because that, yeah, I can see that happening. A lot of legislators who voted for the study when it comes to big ticket items and actually putting the state's money where their vote was. That's where we're going to really have to organize and put pressure on them.
Definitely. And I hope that I really see that during this midterms that people getting legislators to commit to like whatever they propose. I'm down for that as well. But taking a turn into another corporate leech on our community with the data centers legislation as well. We've been seeing data centers kind of pop up around the country, but also throughout the state, especially in Prince George's is in their big fight in Landover. Charles County is having their fight when it comes to their zoning for data centers as well. You have counties like Frederick and Carroll and even Calvert who are more saying bring us data centers, but you have the issue with PJM. Can we actually sustain it? What is the Green Party's view on data centers as a whole within the state, and also how did you feel about the study that got overwritten as well?
Yeah, I'll first say when I, joined Andy on this ticket and started running for lieutenant governor in Maryland this summer, I was not expecting data centers to be one of the biggest issues that folks from Western Maryland to the Eastern Shore, all over Baltimore and the DMV, Southern Maryland, people are pissed that, that farmland is being converted into these data centers, that they're being jammed into suburban areas, and that all across the state, utility bills are through the roof, and that is directly linked to these data centers. And so it's something that conservative folks I've talked to, progressive folks I've talked to, all find fault with these corporations who are using these angel investors to run massive debt. I mean, they're losing money on these corporations in order to build out the the data center infrastructure to hopefully one day in the future be able to make a profit off of invading our privacy and sucking up all of our data. So that's the first thing I'll say, is that it has been a surprise how prominent this issue is. And we had, you mentioned the Largo fight. We had Taylor Fraser McCullum on our podcast, Go Green 2026. That's the podcast that Andy Ellis and I host every Wednesday, although we're thinking about picking a different night because we don't want to have all the lefty podcasts on the same night. So we should talk offline about that. But I mean, having Taylor on and the way she, broke down the kind of shady deals and anti-democratic land use policies that we know that county councils and local politicians have been engaged in for a long time. But the way that played out, and that the way that community came together and organized and used public testimony and used new forms of social media to oppose this, that was really heartening. And that was, again, political education at its best, creating a platform through this campaign to have on a local anti-data center organizer. And in fact, her view, which is one that our campaign shares, is actually more nuanced than you might expect. It's not no data centers ever, anywhere, forever. It is let folks in communities have a say, have smaller scale data centers, and why not have them be publicly controlled? Just a couple of days ago on Saturday, I was at a protest at the steps of City Hall here in Baltimore City, and it was Sunrise, the local Sunrise, and a new public power campaign that is taking shape in Baltimore, which is saying that people through their municipalities or their counties should control the means of electricity generation, right? Literally public power, because BGE and Pepco and all these companies are selling us out and giving better rates to these data centers. And so I think when we look at this through the Green Party values of grassroots democracy, making sure that people closest to the problem have the most say in the solution in terms of, ecology and environmental wisdom, making sure that we're not bringing back online coal plants or using diesel generator. They're using diesel generators to power these things, the dirtiest form of
Disgusting.
energy, right? It's disgusting. And it's a huge move backwards for environmental justice in our state and our region. And so if we apply these values and we just pump the brakes a little bit and we allow a regulatory framework to take place through grassroots and democratic participation in the process, then we can have positive outcomes in which maybe there's a municipally owned or co-op owned data center. The technology itself isn't necessarily evil or bad. It just needs to be accountable to the people whose lives it's impacting.
No, you're right. One thing that I actually have never heard people talk about a publicly owned data center, though, I
It's our
think is
data.
yeah, but you're right. You're right. It is ours, and it makes sense. And then there can be more regulation because one of the concerns is not just the water usage, electricity usage. You talked about the environmental impact, also the big lie that is told about how it'll create all these jobs. But when you look post construction, you're left with security jobs and probably some telework data analysis people who don't even live in the state or even this side of the country as well. And what can you say as far as like, because one thing that I've been seeing definitely is that even though in Landover in different places you have people coming out in the hundreds to say we do not want this data center in our neighborhood, you see elected officials still continue to move forward as if they're thinking that, hey, the public's mad now. Come election time, if all of us are the bad guy together, you'll just forget about it or not care.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're pointing to, Carlos, is this pattern which is taking shape, which is sort of there could be a positive abundance framework, but what you're seeing is this corporate abundance framework, which means a future without jobs. It's kind of disconnected from the workers who produce the abundance, right? So whether it's Waymo and, Governor Moore and Democrats supporting driverless vehicles, whether it's data centers, whether it's quantum, these are what Wes Moore has said, the parts of the economy that he wants to supercharge, that he sees as the future of the Maryland economy, but there are no jobs, right? So how could you have a future economy that doesn't have jobs, especially in a moment when federal workers are getting laid off, when tech workers are getting laid off because these jobs are being replaced by AI or being offshored again. And
And then
so
not to cut you off, but also Westmore sent the order out to basically ask state employees, hey, can you take a buyout? Because we don't have the money to pay you.
right. I mean, that is the ultimate irony is we have a party which claims to be the party of resistance, but when the rubber hits the road, they say, "Oh, that was actually a good move. I'm going to use that against my unionized workers too," right? And it was kind of a it was worse, I think, in some ways than the Doge buyout, right? I mean, I think it was a few months of pay and an extra $500 per year of service. So people have worked for the state, public servants who've worked for the state for decades are being given a pittance, and it was really shameful, especially because the role that public sector workers, including my own, the teachers union, played in getting more elected and getting him through the primary, and then to see him turn around and cut public jobs after his first year. Remember, he had that like 10,000 new public sector jobs
Yeah.
mandate, and then a couple, I think Brian Sears and a couple other journalists were like, "Hey, how's that going?" And he's like, "Not that well. We've only hired this many." And then you never heard about it again because I think he was going to these billionaire camps in Idaho and places, Sun Valley, Idaho, and places like that, and hearing from these tech investors, well, we're going to come up with a tool that can do, social services filings automatically with that. You don't need those social workers anymore. And so I think he kind of got hip to what was coming down the pipe and backed off of that goal early on. And in fact, one of his other biggest initiatives is is the it's basically an internship program, right? He created a whole new department and it's about service and all that, but these are low paid internships. And so how can you replace salaried jobs with good benefits with telling young people the summer between years at college or after high school, but yeah, do this internship and that'll lead to a good paying job, maybe, right?
Yeah,
That's not a
maybe.
replacement.
We don't have any state jobs for you, but
Right.
hey, come and volunteer and help us go. And I even think back to when we saw or are still seeing all the layoffs of the federal government, where Westmore was telling former federal government workers, come join the state and work for us, and then to turn right back around and say, thank you so much. I'm gonna need you to go ahead and clock out for me now because you're done here too.
Yeah.
It's astonishing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that plays to being very much wrapped up in the national media cycle. And we see even some of this redistricting stuff, right? We're talking about one seat. And if it comes down to one seat, Democrats are in trouble anyway, right? And so, but I think is at the heart of this hard push for redistricting and what was at the heart of that narrative around hiring federal workers who had been laid off was staying relevant in the national news cycle and kind of letting the national news cycle dictate or influence state policy, when instead state policy should be based on the needs of local people here in Maryland.
No, you're right. And then the craziest thing to me about Westmore, not just recently, his whole like time as governor, has been the things he picks and chooses to like stake his national flag on. To me, you staking your name on redistricting as if that's going to be a lot. When you just said it, we only have the one Republican, Andy Harris, and from what it seems, the voters in his district keep voting him in. So one, it's what people are voting for. But then two is that he is completely silent when it comes to ICE and immigration. It seems like that is the one thing he doesn't want to touch. Even a lot of the claims in that allegedly he is not supportive of banning 287G. So can you talk about you all stance on ICE G, but also where you're disappointed in the governor?
Yeah. So I'll start with a story about local organizing because I think it always bubbles up to the state and national level from local organizing. But during the first Trump administration, I was part of a coalition that pushed now outgoing, but I think it was his first term, County Executive Calvin Ball, who had an agreement with ICE for the local detention center down there in Jessup. We pushed through all of the typical access oriented petitions and calling your county council member and working with longtime activists on the ground in Howard County. But ultimately, what it took was a massive protest and an act of civil disobedience over 10 people joining arms and blocking the driveway to the detention center. And after that is when, and a lot of media attention, right? Embarrassing media attention, because this is someone who's supposed to be progressive and is supposed to value civility, right? And all of that. And instead they're, caging immigrants and until they can be turned over to the Trump administration to be deported to who knows where. And we won that fight because we didn't listen to moderating forces who said, well, maybe we can reform this. Maybe we can make this inhumane, cruel policy agreement with this. I don't want to say rogue agency, because they're doing what they're being told to
Yeah.
do, right? They're doing their job. They're not a rogue agency. They're just a cruel and racist agency. And so we got the Howard County to drop that agreement. And I think that's what needs to happen at the state level. There's really good organizing happening in Frederick County and other places to push back against 287 agreements between sheriff's offices and departments of correction. But I think it needs to happen at the national level. And it seems like both the governor and the Senate president are impediments to that. And only after the really heartbreaking and infuriating cruelty of the first year of Trump 2.0 have they maybe started to move on this issue. So I think local organizers need to keep pushing, need to reject kind of access oriented half reforms and take a more abolitionist framework when it comes to dealing with ICE and local collaboration.
No, you're definitely right. The one thing I'll say is that from the way it's been kind of framed now is that it looks like Bill Ferguson, the Senate president, is more on the favor of banning 287G now. So one of my biggest things is going to be looking at if it does pass and like in what version it passes as to, because a lot of times they'll use the headline of, oh, this passes, but then it's like, oh, well, it's not really passing to ban it. It's more like, hey, we just encourage you not to use it, blah, 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 blah. But then seeing if we get another one of those famous Westmore vetoes to it
Mhm.
as well, because it seems like he is very for canceling out progressive legislation. And then also, one thing I am interested to see is this whole slate of his to see, is it really just a firing squad against progressives and seeing where people go. But as we close out here, I want to ask you the question that I know a lot of people ask Green Party candidates that I hate that they ask you all this, but what is the pathway towards victory? If you look at you look at Maryland, majority Democratic state, I don't think has voted for a Republican governor since Hogan. Before that, probably even longer. We have what two Democrats? Everyone at the state level is Democratic. How do you see the pathway for victory, and what does victory look like for you as a Green Party lieutenant governor candidate?
Sure. So, like everything that grassroots organizers do, it is an uphill battle to being elected as a third party candidate. It is not impossible, even at the level of governor. So, Jesse Ventura in Minnesota is an example of a third party candidate who was elected governor in our lifetimes, right? So, this is possible. And, my brother lived in Minneapolis for a while, and I would go out there, and they had a green on the Minneapolis City Council, and I would meet with him and talk to him about governing, right? So on some level, what we're trying to do is expand the conversation and pull the policy conversation towards the left by running on popular issues that centrists funded by millionaires and billionaires don't want part of the public conversation. So some of it is that political education piece. Some of it is setting a new high watermark so that people after us can improve on that outcome, right? So the best third party outcome for governor since the Civil War would be about 4%, 100,000 votes. And so what we're trying to do is redefine winning, because when you have a duopoly and two parties are fighting seemingly to the death, but it's an unending battle and it's a zero sum game, and the people that lose are working class folks across the country, because it allows the special interests and the billionaires to control our government. You can't take a step back and say, okay, what do we actually want to see happen? And I think if what we want to see happen is influencing the policy outcomes, setting a new high watermark so more folks can come after us, we can do that through setting goals that other folks might not consider winning. So participation in the debates. If we are interested in political education, if we are interested in pulling the conversation towards the left-handed side of the spectrum, then being part of the debates, especially the ones that Maryland Public Television hosts with our tax dollars, is really, really important. So we're going to have a bill in the Maryland House of Delegates this year, which requires, well, if they want to keep their state funding, incentivizes Maryland Public Television to include all candidates who are qualified based on the State Board of Elections to appear in the general election in the debates that they host. And that would give us a platform to really push these policies that you and I have been talking about and you and I have agreed are not included in the mainstream conversation. So, what does redefining winning look like? It looks like participation in the debates. It looks like qualifying for Maryland public financing, because with that, $750,000, we could put up billboards about reparations, about Palestinian solidarity, about ending giveaways to data centers and billionaires, right? We could put up billboards across the state and really supercharge that conversation. And so these are goals short of winning state power that are still really important for movement building and future advocacy. And so we are trying to redefine what winning looks like by creating a platform where people can take up parts of our policies, our platform, and enact them through the current power structures, even as we are contesting that power structure and trying to create a new multi-party system.
Wow. So then comes the other question that I also hate asking. Why not smaller office? Why take on the governorship in the lieutenant governor? Because a lot of criticism goes towards like the Jill Stein people of like, look, they only come out once every 4 years. They focus on these high level races, but no one's caring about your city council, school board, state delegate seats. Why the high level races?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And it's because of the rules of the game that have been written by Democrats and Republicans, and in Maryland, just written by Democrats. And in order to maintain ballot access as what the state calls a non principal party, all third parties have to get at least 1% in the presidential race or the governor's race, or collect 10,000 valid signatures, which really means collecting like twice that number or more than twice that number every couple of years. And so by getting at least 1%, which is kind of the floor of that goal that we have, 1 to 4%, we are going to save grassroots organizers all across the state hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of petitioning at farmers markets, petitioning at metro stations. And those folks are going to be able to use that time for activism, organizing, direct action that is going to improve things in their community. So if we can hit our floor goal of 1%, it will have a ripple effect into Maryland politics at the local and state level. And so that's why we're running for governor, because Democrats have created a system in which non-principal parties, third parties, have to kind of do this extra step in order to qualify for ballot access, to allow those down ballot, those city council, those county council, those state delegate races to occur. My heart is really in local organizing, and I've worked on city council campaigns that in 2020, the Franco Mueller Paz campaign, for example, hit a high watermark for third party politics, not seen in a long time in Baltimore and Maryland. Worked on state delegate campaigns like Josh Harris's, like Andy Ellis and Glenn Ross's. One of my first times working on a campaign was actually in District 20 for Dan Robinson, who was a Green elected to the Tacoma Park City Council, who was running for delegate. And he got about 10%. He did quite well. So I think we are running not because we want to see our name up on the billboards, not because we necessarily want to have state power. We are first and foremost grassroots organizers who see our ability to get at least 1%, about 25,000 votes, as a way to empower other grassroots organizers to have a bigger impact in their community and to run for those down ballot races that are so important.
Wow. Okay. Okay. I love that. Is it so? Do you expect by the general election next year to also have green candidates also running for local office this cycle? Is the goal to get the 1% this cycle so that next cycle you can start lining up people? What's your all's game plan that?
So, I mean, Carlos, you have a lot of people in your very rich grassroots network who like getting into trouble, right? Who like challenging power. And one way to do that is, if you're running for office, is through the Democratic primary. But it's not the only way, because often those primaries are very crowded, right? And it's hard to break out and get attention. But in a general election, running as a Green, you can pick a few issues and make those issues much more salient. And so, yes, we have a few down ballot candidates who have already registered with the State Board of Elections, but we would welcome more, especially in Southern Maryland, where you are, Anne Arundel, and so forth. Traditionally, the Maryland Green Party has been very strong in Montgomery County and Baltimore City, Baltimore County, but we've had local parties in Western Maryland, in other parts of the state. And really, a small group of folks we know are capable of changing the world, are capable of changing their communities. So if folks want to run on our platform, if folks want to have technical support, please reach out to us. My email is owen at gogreen2026.com. You can check out our website, gogreen2026.com, and learn how you can get involved. We would love to have more folks hop on this bandwagon.
Awesome. Awesome. And please let me know who they are. I would love to have them on the podcast and talk with them, hear their platforms and what's their theory of all that. Thank you. Thank you again for being here with us. Please tell the audience how they can follow you, know what's going on, stay involved, help with the getting on the debate stage and all that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carlos, for having me on. Left-handed solidarity forever. If you want to get involved, you can find our link tree, but pretty much any platform, it's Go Green 2020. Ellis is a governor candidate. I'm Owen Silverman Andrews, the lieutenant governor candidate. You can check out our website. You can check out our YouTube. It's all Go Green 2026, some variation of that. We're also on Insta, Facebook, Twitter, and so on. Please follow us. Please sign our debate petition. So I mentioned the law that the bill that we got pre-filed, which is going to be debated in the House of Delegates about debate access. So we have a petition. If you go to the landing page, it's the banner at the top. Open debates, right? Let Marylanders hear all their options. Let Marylanders decide which candidate is closest to their platform and their priorities. And then we also are trying to qualify for Maryland public financing, which again, if folks can spare $1, $5, $10, that's what's going to power us to this grassroots victory of qualifying for being the first statewide general election, the first third party campaign to qualify for public financing. So please donate, please sign that petition, and you can follow us as well.
Let's get it done. Let's get it done. You all, thank you. Thank you so much. I know we're going to have you back multiple times between now and the election and even after that. It has been wonderful. And you all remember this is a podcast, so please rate us 5 stars. If you're on YouTube, subscribe, do all the little funny things you can. And then we look forward to seeing you next time here on the Left-Handed Leftist podcast. Good night, you all.